Your bucket should be full before filling others' buckets. We believe that helping your own country is the prerequisite for helping people overseas. Set up three pieces. Firstly, who are the actors of this debate? The actors mean the ones who are providing support for the ones in need. These are the ones who have financial capability to provide help by giving aids, donations, jobs, and whatnot to the underprivileged. Specifically, the actor here is mainly the governments, and other actors can be rich people or powerful politicians who are capable. Secondly, what does our world look like? We believe that helping poor people in your own country is more important than helping people overseas. However, this doesn't mean that our country will be completely abandoning overseas and international connections. It is just that our priority is for your own country while people will provide help overseas as well. Thirdly, what does the status quo look like? No country is perfect. Even developed ones like USA, Japan, or Nordic nations face international issues. While overseas problems are urgent, countries facing serious crises should prioritize their own country. Especially developing nations must solve poverty and stabilize themselves before helping others later. Moving on to our two constructives then. First argument then about the moral obligation for the government and citizens to help their own country. Yes.
So you're saying that human life is worth less just because it's born outside of your borders?
I said no country is perfect. Even developed ones like USA, Japan, and Nordic nations face internal issues. So while overseas problems are urgent, countries still have their own urgent problems. They should solve the urgent problems. Even people will be dying in their country as well. Why don't you solve your own country's problems more than overseas problems? And moving on to our first argument, which is the moral obligation for the governments and citizens to help their own country. Premise here. Firstly, there is a social contract where citizens pay tax and contribute to society. The government has the authority to pay that back by helping and protecting citizens. And secondly, citizens have the moral obligation to contribute to their own country to a certain extent as they live there and were protected there. But why is this true? Firstly, citizens are part of a shared social community, and the state and community sustain individuals through public goods, safety, healthcare, education, and everything. Because these are funded and maintained collectively, individuals own reciprocal contribution by volunteering, paying taxes, following laws, or helping fellow citizens in need. Thus, there is a moral duty to give back both legally and ethically. Secondly, ethical responsibility tends to begin with those nearest to us. Just as one should care for their family before strangers, citizens should ensure their national community thrives before focusing outward. This is important because two reasons. Firstly, social cohesion happens when citizens prioritize their nation's well-being. It builds unity, trust, and shared identity. Without this moral bond, societies fragment and everyone pursues self-interest, leading to inequality and neglect. Secondly, movements such as the populist movements might protest when they feel like rich individuals, politicians, and the governments is prioritizing foreign problems over their own country's problems. They feel like they're overlooked, and this can cause distrust among politicians and etc. Second argument then about building national strength leads to future global impact. Premise: helping our own poor first strengthens the country, creating a foundation from which future aid and international influence can be more effective. By investing in domestic poverty reduction, education, healthcare, and infrastructure, governments make citizens more productive, healthy, and economically active. This strengthens tax revenue, social stability, and institutional capacity, building a solid internal foundation for future sustainable global aid. As most funding goes towards solving domestic issues first, the country's own development accelerates, making it better equipped to help others later. And before that, I want to talk about South Korea. South Korea was initially a country with bad welfare and high rates of poverty. They were one of the developing countries, but they concentrated on developing themselves. Now they have significantly increased the amounts of international aid sharply since they are now stabilized and developed. Moving on, why does this argument matter, and what are the exclusive practical benefits? Firstly, political stability. We see that failing to help domestic poor triggers protests and loss of trust in governments. A strong supported citizen relationship and connection ensures political legitimacy. B, economic productivity. We see that we benefit here as well, as because reducing domestic poverty strengthens the workforce, increases consumption, and generates tax revenue, and etc. And C, sustainable global impact. We take this point too because by prioritizing internal development, a nation becomes stable and capable enough to help others. Only country that has resolved domestic poverty can offer meaningful, accountable, and lasting aid overseas. Therefore, we're so proud to propose. Thank you.
Human suffering should not depend on borders, as all lives have equal worth. If we value our own country's citizens over another, that still means we're still shooting ourselves in the foot. Therefore, so proud to oppose. As the first speaker for opposition, I'll do three. This is my speech. Firstly, provide some recharacterization as to what our side believes this debate is about. Secondly, provide some rebuttals to his proposition. And finally, introduce our side's two-main argument about moral obligation and how helping others also helps ourselves. So, firstly, some characterization, right? We believe that in this debate, we shouldn't be talking that much about the logistics that is put into helping others or other countries, as it is not a policy motion. We believe that because this motion is discussing about which method is more important, more time should be put into discussing the ethics and morals of help and why which side is more important than the other. So, what does help look like on our side? We believe that help means unconditionally supporting someone regardless of, for example, if they're from the same culture as you. Help means still supporting everyone, even if they're from the other side of the globe. Therefore, I would like to recharacterize our side stance. We believe that helping poor people in our own country is not more important than helping people overseas, but rather equally important. So firstly, some rebuttals towards proposition's main points, right? The first main point that I talked about is that countries have a moral responsibility to protect their own citizens and country. But however, we believe that just because you have a responsibility to help your own citizens doesn't mean you also can't help others. Morality isn't just a whole piece. Helping someone overseas doesn't take away moral duty to citizens. This is why our stance is saying that we have an equal responsibility. And finally, we also believe that international aid often protects domestic citizens indirectly. So helping others fulfills your duty at home in the long term. For example, supporting another countries during their crisis can stabilize trade, prevent refugee crises, and just avoid some global conflicts that could harm
Yuan.
in the long run, which I'll later further explain in my second argument. We believe that this rebuttal also vegetates their second argument about stability for the future. Now, moving on to our side's two main arguments. The first main argument that we're going to talk about is that we have a moral obligation because all lives have equal worth. The first layer to this is that each human deserves equal compassion regardless of, for example, where they live. The pain of hunger, fear, and feels the same to a poor family in a country as it does to one overseas. Judge, you might think that people have a more right to help their community, which is their country, but just imagine another person that is in the same exact situation as the person you are helping is on the other side of the globe. Won't you still want to help them
Yuan.
because they're in the same situation? If they were part of your culture, won't you still help them? The second layer to this is that because of that, it will be unfair to say that helping people at home should automatically take priority over helping those abroad. Both kinds of suffering are real and deserve attention. Domestic poverty often affects living conditions, while overseas conflicts can threaten people's very survival. We believe that each has their different form of urgency, but both deserve their equal care and respect. So, in summary of this argument, we're not saying that countries should completely ignore their own citizens, and we agree that
Last
poverty
POI,
matters.
ma'am.
But we disagree that helping at home reject is more important than helping abroad. Both are moral responsibilities, and a fair balance approach means we don't rank one kind of suffering above the other as a moral responsibility. Now, moving on to our side's second argument is that we live in a more interconnected world, which means that helping others also helps ourselves. First layer to this is that in today's global world, problems in one country quickly affects others. Conflicts, pandemics, economic crashes don't stop at national borders. Ignoring suffering overseas can easily come back to can harm a country's own people through, for example, refugee crisis or rising global instability. So, an example of this is, for instance, the U.S. relying heavily on China's manufactured good. If China faces serious internal problems like conflict or such economic collapses, and the US refuses to help, China may become less willing to cooperate or sign key trade treaties later on in the future. We believe that this will hurt everyday Americans through higher prices and fewer job opportunities. So this shows that by caring about problems overseas, we also protect our own economic stability over time. So when we assist other countries, especially during their own crises, we don't just save lives abroad, we also build partnerships that benefit our own citizens in the long run. So we believe that this cooperation can make, for example, trade smoother, and this means that it's not just a charity, it's an investment in its own stability. The more connected we make our world, the more helping others also helps us. So for all the reasons, please give the ballot to opposition.
Moving forward is important. However, please know that after developing themselves, they can help others. We think that developing yourselves first will make more future donations possible, as wouldn't nations provide better help overseas when they develop themselves first as they are more stable. Also, please know that we do not completely abandon international support, as our Prime Minister already clarified. It is just that the prioritization is on their own country, while people would give some other support overseas. Opposition says giving aid abroad first shows more commitment, but they ignore the reality that without helping our citizens first, that aid is fragile, unreliable, and often wasted. Our approach secures impact at home and lays the foundation for meaningful help everywhere. Proud to propose. More clarification then. Let me clarify about the scope of the debate then. Two things here. First of all, the scope of the countries in this debate. Picture a mid-capacity state like today's South Korea, solid tax and welfare rails, but finite budgets and gaps at the margins. So basically countries that are not perfect so that resources and finance overflow, but also not about countries that are so poor that they can't even sustain a single government. Everyone abroad shrinks fiscal space, and now the base for next year's compounding returns. Domestically, A1 plugs directly into existing pipes.
and costs are low and effects stack back inside the same ecosystem. Overseas, the same one must run to third-party pipes, raising overhead and error. Democratic legitimacy also binds us. Taxpayers expect co-members' needs met first, ignore that and support for any aid erodes. But on the other hand, opposition makes a very selfish world by only taking examples of developed countries that have a lot of resources. But two, let me re-clarify our stance and emphasize once again, no, it's not that we ignore every single foreigner forever. If opposition listened to PM speech set up specifically, then they would know that we are not actually blocking foreigners out of our country. We are not like thinking that, oh, their life is not valuable just because like they're over borders. We believe that we're just prioritizing the citizens that are inside our country. We believe that this is a very key piece of our setup. Moving straight on to the last argument about proposition about accountability and effectiveness. Four things I want to do in this argument then. First of all, what this adds to our case. This argument actually explains execution. It explains why money spent at home reliably turns into results you can verify, fix, and scale. While the same money overseas is harder to target, monitor, and course correct. It is not just we care more at home, it's that we control the levers at home with our own will. Let me explain why is this so then. Domestically, agencies run a tight loop. We have income registries, school and clinic links, and caseworkers who can check needs in person. Payments move on national rails, like for example, ID-linked accounts, utility, and pen portals, so aid lands quickly and can even preempt harm that will happen in the future, like for example, preventing an eviction or disconnection before it actually happens. If something misfires, audits, courts, ombuds, media, and elections force corrections. Programs can bundle supports, for example, like cash plus housing and childcare and so much more, because data can lawfully interpretate and the state can convene hospitals, schools, and employers. Overseas, each step weakens. Beneficiary lists are noisier, delivery runs through subcontract chains, monitoring is periodic, sanctions are weak, and cultural or governance frictions raise leakage and delay. But three, why is this important then? Priorities should follow expected impact per public dollar and the ability to learn. Domestic accountability produces verifiable outcomes, rent kept, school attendance up, clinic visits completed, job placement, and those results feed back into our own systems, improving targeted rules and service design next quarter. That learning compounds fewer emergency costs, stronger human capital, larger future tax base. By contrast, even good overseas projects really plug into our administrative learning loop, and when oversight is thin, a larger share of funds is lost to delay or misallocation. We want the greatest certain reduction in suffering now and greater capacity to help later. We should fund where delivery and improvement are most controllable. But lastly, how is this not achievable on opposition side? Only domestic first priority consistently uses our jurisdiction, datasets, and sanction power. A global first priority cannot replicate those enforcement tools abroad at scale, so it cannot match our certainty of delivery or the compounding gains to our own welfare capacity. Therefore, I'm so proud to propose.
Gov is just choosing the easy way out without actually helping their citizens. In my speech, first I'll be giving a few rebuttals, and then I'll move on and add more onto my teammates' point about how it is morally incorrect to ignore others when they are from your country, and two, how we strengthen bonds from other countries. So our opponents have talked about how just like families, they save their lives over strangers. This, however, doesn't mean that it is moral. You can say that a mom will save their children over 100 people, but that is not moral, and we do not stand by it. It is immoral to let other people die just because you believe your own country's survival is more important, and we believe that all lives are equal. They've also talked about how citizens pay for taxes and that governments make countries more productive. But how come in the status quo the country is currently trying to solve the issue, but however there are people still laying on the streets with no home to go to? Because our resources aren't enough. Our power alone cannot solve poverty, so we need to seek help internationally in order to actually help the issue. Gov relies on the short-term feeling that they are doing something, but in reality it's doing nothing in the long run. If you give them one meal quickly, they'll still starve if you don't give them food later. We need quick, quality, continuous help, and only on our side can we achieve this. They've also mentioned that we cherry pick developed countries, but this applies to every country. In fact, it helps the undeveloped countries more, giving them alliances and long-term help, as I've just explained. They keep emphasizing that they are not giving up international support, but the same goes for us. In my speech, I will prove why only on our side will we be able to help the issue of poverty, not only internationally, but nationally too. We are putting effort into our own country, but also valuing international connections on the same level. If you wait so long in order for your own country to develop, you're missing on so many opportunities. I'll take that POI before I move on to my next point.
You said that your third argument is that it is immoral to ignore other people, but didn't we just say that we're not ignoring anybody, just prioritizing the citizens in our own country?
you're quote-unquote prioritizing the citizens in your own country, but you have a limited amount of funds. So you're barely helping this country. You're just giving your spare change to these countries, and it's not really helping them at all, and it wouldn't develop an alliance at all. So now I'll move on to my first point, how it is morally incorrect. It is immoral to ignore another person's life just because they're not from their country. Helping people shouldn't be restricted by borders. Problems like poverty, disease, and climate change are global problems that if you try and solve in another country would benefit everyone in the long run. Currently, the whole world affects each other very easily because we are so close by technologies like train, airplane, etc. We can help them before they become worse and inevitably affect us. We can reduce the possibility of their negative impact in the future. The country we are helping, as stated on the info side, is countries that are experiences disasters and war. They need help the most. Sure, poverty may exist in your country, but can you name one country without poverty? It is something that will always exist. And no, we are not saying we shouldn't help the issue, but rather we are saying that these issues aren't as urgent as people literally dying from gunfires, explosions, or hunger. The cost of providing essentials will also be cheaper in this country that needs help, meaning we would be able to save more lives and improve conditions with the same amount of money. We will still have poverty programs and shelters on our side. It's just that we will also help other countries and provide them with more aid. Now on to the second point that I will talk more on is that we are able to strengthen bonds with other countries. When we aid other countries with issues, they will come back later and help us. We achieve the long-term effect by actually trying to find a way to solve this issue instead of using our limited amount of resources to try and provide people in poverty with food again and again with no sign of stopping. Actually, receiving external help is what we need to actually solve this issue. We can't do it alone, and you can view our aid to the other country, one, as a helping hand that saved lives, and two, as an investment to get aid for our country. This is just like how even though China is still in development, they choose to help poorer regions for their own benefit. We actually get to achieve aid from other countries in order to help our people in the long term. So only on our side will we be able to help people in our country and people outside of our country in the long term, while they will only achieve a short-term impact and a vision of helping these poor people. Thank you.
We do not completely abandon international aids. It's just the prioritization in our own country. Opposition says that this will barely help other countries since the funding is limited. But then how is your side helping your own country? Are you completely abandoning your country when even your goal is to develop yourself? If they do, they're completely relying on international support, not their own ability. Also, that is not barely helping. At least we still maintain good relationships by being at least some help, right? So moving on to reframing and clarifying the metric. So far, both sides agree that helping the poor is essential, right? The key question, however, Judge, is not whether poverty alleviation is good, but whether governments should prioritize their aid domestically or overseas, right? From the start, we have told you, Judge, that governments have a primary duty to protect and empower their own citizens first. The opposition relies on idealistic claims like foreign aid demonstrate a lot of things in their own country, but they fail to show how such aid succeeds when domestic poverty is unresolved. Resources are finite, and without a strong, stable domestic base, we see that foreign aid risks inefficiency, political backlash, or more moral inconsistency at the end. Also, Judge, note that our case is not about denying that international aid has benefits. Our case specifically targets the idea that helping poor citizens first produces deeper, lasting impacts at the end. Prioritizing the domestic poverty actually strengthens institutions, empowers citizens, and creates a stable economy, which at the end is the foundation that allows future global aid to be larger, more effective, and sustainable. The opposition talks about how the overseas aid is so urgent for survival, but neglecting our own citizens puts them at real risk, first of all, right? Our approach makes it more effective because citizens survive and thrive first, creating a stable nation capable of reliable, sustainable help abroad. Also, Judge, about the point that international support is needed for development, helping abroad first cannot build a strong country from weakness. Domestic stability, skilled citizens, and functioning economy are what creates real international credibility at the end. Also, Judge, the opposition claims overseas aid is needed to solve their domestic problems, but these are often a lot of times small scale issues compared to the urgent need at home, right? Prioritizing foreign aid minor gains, rejected abroad, squanders resources, which while our approach actually addresses real immediate impacts for our own citizens and overseas as well. Then move on to our first clash then about the primary obligation for citizens versus idealistic global aid, right? The government's duty is first and foremost to those under its care, right? Its own citizens. From the start, we have shown you that helping domestic poor ensures accountability, transparency, and measurable outcomes at the end. Opposition cannot replicate this at all because sending aids abroad first provides uncertain, unaccountable, and easily wasted benefits, right? Judge, it seems creative. It seems to create temporary visibility, but it does not generate lasting or domestic or even global impacts at all. Rejected. Why does this matter then? First of all, citizens who see tangible support are more likely to sustain political and economic stability, which is essential for any future international commitments. Then move on to the second clash then, which side provides better and more aid in the future. First of all, we say that opposition's logic is very, very, very shallow. They measure success by symbolic aid, which is not a real impact at all, right? Opposition claims that helping poor people abroad first demonstrates a lot of things in their own country that benefits after all, but judge, note that this is very superficial because their focus on visible gestures rather than measurable results are very superficial after all. So why does this matter then? Like our PM mentioned before, we talk about accountability, sustainability, and moral credibility, right? So judge, why is this exclusive and clear, right? Only by prioritizing domestic poverty first can a government achieve real measurable impacts and political legitimacy and social stability while building the foundation for effective global aid as well, right? Opposition's model, giving aid abroad first, is shallow and very risky. Symbolic gestures, no guaranteed benefits, and citizens are left behind after all. They cannot replicate the double impact we achieve, judge, immediate relief at home and long-term global capacity. Judge, our side delivers real accountable results. Theirs cannot, so propose.
The reason side proposition lost this debate was because they simply don't understand what the word importance means. Because being important does not mean you need to spend half of being equally important does not mean you need to spend half of your government and your entire government and your entire country's fund on that thing. Right? Being important only means that you actually recognize that a lot and you actually prioritize that a lot. Right? It doesn't mean that for everything you gotta actually put all of your things in it. And neither doesn't mean that you gotta put 50% of all of your budgets and 50% of all of your resources and like budgets in it, right? And that is why we're so proud to oppose. Two things I want to do in this speech. Firstly, I want to do some clash analysis, but second of all, I want to do some weighing, right? Now, firstly on the principle part, and I think both sides have push the principle. Side proposition's principle is about government having obligation to help their citizens. Our side's principle is about how helping shouldn't be restricted by borders. Two main weighings. Firstly, based on magnitude, that I think our side believe that moral worth doesn't stop at borders, right? Because I think everybody deserves help when in need, right? Their side believes compassion depends on where you were born. That's unfair and inconsistent. If everyone act that way, no one would ever help anyone else out of their country. Our principle works for all nations. Their principle is limited. What does this mean? This simply means that our principle simply helps more people in general, and thus, our principle simply wins in terms of magnitude. Secondly, if every country say we care more about our own, I think compassion becomes conditional and selfish, right? That destroys the most trust that hold the international system together, making things like war, neglection, and like inequality even worse, right? Our principle of equal human value preserves empathy, cooperation, and peace. The most base, the actual moral base of civilization, right? And then they will tell you about something about like how they prioritize their own like people. Does not mean that they just simply don't care about other people. I think it's really clear about how like a lot of the times what people outside of your country are experiencing is actually far worse than what you are actually experiencing in your country. So I think it's really clear about how like you should simply like make it equal. About how you should simply make it equal, right? Now, even if we lose the principal bid, why do we still win this debate? Because we still win on impact, which leads to my practical clash. Now, the first thing I want to emphasize here is that the argument for helping overseas, this is not about neglecting domestic needs. It's about recognizing that these are not mutually exclusive choices. With that in mind, some rebuttals here. The first thing that side proposition told you is about like how our side of on their side, at least like they help these people outside a bit. However, on our side, we don't. About how like on our side how we don't like really help both people both in terms of your own country and people outside, right? I think this is simply like not true given the fact that I think people in your own country, we obviously are spending more fun. We just like things like important like people outside your country is still like really important. So I think like we're still actually helping people within your country by a lot. But second of all, I think we obviously help more in terms of like helping other people outside your country more compared to this type proposition, right? Because like obviously probably they only spend like 1% or like at most like 2% of their trades or like of their budgets on like outsiders. But however, I think on our side of the house, we probably spent things like 5% or things like 10%, which obviously will help more people, which obviously will help more people, right? But Judge, also note here that I think given the fact that we're both putting effort into our country, but we are the ones that are actually valuing international connections on the same level, right? If you wait for so long in order for your own country to develop, you're missing so many opportunities to develop these connections, right? And obviously, I think both sides can agree that this kind of connection is really, really important. It's something that is like really, really important, right? Thus, now some weighing, right? What can we achieve on our side of the house? Hey, we achieve a simple, better bond compared to other, like with other countries, right? Given the fact that we spend more of our budget on other countries, right? But second of all, I think we don't actually change that much in terms of like helping our own citizens, right? But I think things like even like 5% of your own budget probably won't help, probably won't solve the entire poverty issue, right? However, 5% of your own budget from every country is able to solve like a massive problem such as like there's natural disaster in another country by a lot, right? Conclusion then is really, really simple. Only on side opposition is you can actually get this kind of incentive of like what everybody actually values the same. But only on side proposition is when you can actually build the international bond and build this kind of like ability and build out of this kind of opportunities. Very proud to propose.
Proposition has lost because they have forgotten our stance about equality, assuming that our stance is that we're prioritizing global cooperation over helping ourselves. However, this is not the case, as I already clearly established in my first speech. So as the final speaker for opposition side, I'll do two things in my speech. Firstly, analyze how our side has won all the key clashes, and secondly, weigh the impacts from both sides. So let's look at the clashes first. What is our moral obligation? Helping our community or helping everyone? Judge, I have believed that in my first speech, I've already clearly characterized what help means. Help means unconditionally giving the same support to everyone regardless of what background they come from. We believe that what proposition is doing isn't helping people, but rather favoring them. Therefore, we take this clash and we truly understand what helping even means in this motion. So I think that based off this clash alone, we have already won this debate because we as human beings have to complete these obligations altogether. But now let's move on to the second clash, which is about which side is able to solve the problems such as like poverty better. We think that's really funny how proposition keeps on saying that developing countries have to establish themselves first and cannot depend on foreign help. However, they're forgetting two key parts that our whip has already pointed out. Firstly, how are they able to even help their own country if they're still developing and are lacking the necessary resources? They have to depend on foreign help unless they completely give up these global cooperations. Secondly, I think it's really interesting how proposition said they're not giving up foreign connections completely, which means that they do recognize the value of these relationships, but then also saying how, oh, these strategies are too risky and dangerous, so on. So we believe that we have also won this clash because we clearly established how and have clear mechanisms as to how having this more balanced approach and valuing both is much more effective than just valuing helping yourselves more and just giving up on opportunities. So let's then weigh the impacts, right? Both sides agree that we should help those in need, but as our web has already pointed out, let's weigh how both sides compare. On op, they focus on helping themselves but have forgotten about how they will still miss opportunities, and therefore they're only focusing on the short run, because even if they do like increase their own stance individually in the short run, we believe that in the long run they're missing out a bunch of opportunities that they could have achieved if they value both equally. But on our side, our scale of magnitude is much larger, including in the long term, because we are truly understanding what makes a nation successful. Therefore, we believe that we have taken this debate.
Opposition loses because they keep repeating the idea about how moral worth of something should not depend on the borders and that unconditional support is important. But our previous speaker already told you that first, we do not abandon foreign aid, as we've already explained the significance, and second, we will provide even more aid eventually as countries will develop and will be stable enough for even more aid. They also said developing countries, they should not spend much for others. Like developing countries should rely on foreign help, but yes, while they rely on them with their own resources, they should not spend much for others and should concentrate on themselves, right? If your goal are to develop your own country, why are you pouring from your own bucket to fill other buckets, and why is sufficient international aid guaranteed? If the opposition's main goal at the end of the day is to develop their own country, why don't you just use the funds on yourself? Also, Judge, waiting is only late if you ignore effectiveness totally. Developing our country first ensures aid abroad actually works. It is guaranteed, while opposition's rushed approach risks wasting resources with little real impact. Let me then moving on to like comparing both cases given in this debate. Let's look at opposition's shallow wishy-washy case. They talk about moral obligation, the help coming for us in return, and the immoral parts. Notice, Judge, that all of these actually revolve around the premise that A, foreign support is totally guaranteed, but two, we totally block out everybody that are not in our country. About the first point then, Judge, if you look outside the window, you can clearly see that foreign support is not guaranteed while domestic funding is guaranteed. Their world is very weird. People offer help to each other in order to develop themselves. We think this is ineffective and unrealistic. Why would you pour water from your bucket to fill Ollie's bucket to earn water? But then about the second point, and please, this is the last clarification chance. I wish they don't misunderstand anything. Chaeha and Gaeun and I have repeated on and on that A, we don't ignore anybody, but B, even if we say that, oh yeah, we suddenly become North Korea and we're just funding ourselves, don't you think that if we gave a strong base, then other countries will come and help us more? That will obviously try to trade and have close ties with countries that have a strong social base because countries are self-incentivized and they know that it would benefit them much better once they actually trade with developed countries, because in the future they won't be overly dependent on other countries. So in conclusion, Judge, by developing at home first, we start small but build a strength to big, and helping our citizens now and delivering a far greater lasting impact abroad later. Clear prop ballot, proud to propose.